dear metrochurch family member went to be with Jesus today. I'm very sorry for your loss. The pain we experience or the loss of a loved one can be so deep and incomprehensible. And I pray that the God of all comforts, the man of sorrows, Jesus, who is so compassionate and who sympathizes and empathizes with us, hold you and the family and the entire church family close to himself. When another Chichi shared with me about this Bible study series and asked about the possibility of teaching it, without any hesitancy, I said yes. It was because of two reasons. One, grief has been my companion since 2004. I've gone through traumatic grief personally. And two, I have a deep desire and passion and calling to talk and write about grief. And I felt that the Lord would do something through what He has been teaching me through my lived experience of grief. So I'm grateful for the church, the Metro Church family, Pastor Satish and the Chichi and the elders and all of you for inviting me to be a part of what God is going to do through this study series. I believe God will illuminate our minds and enhance our knowledge of grief and the process of grieving from a biblical, clinical, and neuroscientific perspective. If you have any questions about what I share here, please write them down, and I'm open to answering questions via email or phone, just in case if we don't get time to do that at the end of this session. So thank you for your prayerful attention in the next few minutes. Before I step into the study content, I just want to extend my gratitude to you and the church for caring for our niece Renew as your own. We are so grateful for the body of Christ and the community of believers who rallied around her, Sonu and Theo, during their challenging time. We praise God with you for the healing He has granted Renew, and we continue to appreciate your compassionate care and love for Renew, Sonu, and Theo. May the Lord bless you all in abundant measure for the service you do for her and the family. I want to give you a quick idea of what we will study tonight and on the 27th of this month. We will look at the what and the why of grief tonight. That means we'll look at what is grief and why grief happens. And on the 27th, we will cover the how of the grief or how to grieve with. So to explain the what of grief, I would like to share my story of journeying through traumatic grief, which I'll share from a biblical and neurobiological perspective. I don't want this conversation or study to be very research or clinical focused, but I would like to bring a piece of myself into this conversation and how God redeemed my pain of grief for His glory. And as you listen to this, and especially I'm very aware of the heaviness in the room today and within the church, within the families. And as you listen to this, I hope you'll engage with your heart and your mind. I would encourage you to reflect on what in the story resonates with yours and what part of your story can be understood and cannot be understood from a human perspective. And I also pray that God's supernatural comfort and presence surround you and you feel embraced and blanketed by His love. So when I was 24 years old and newly married, I received a call from my dad, who was in Muscat then. My husband and I were in India, that my mom was admitted to the hospital and had to undergo an emergency surgery, but the surgery wasn't successful. And he shared this dreadful news Molly, looks like mommy has cancer. And as soon as I heard it, I was shocked and my body began to tremble with fear. And I experienced different physiological reactions to the news. I entered a numbed state for a while and I came out of it, and then I cried and screamed. I was experiencing immense fear, just very heavy. I was in a fight, flight, freeze mode. We go into this stress mode whenever we experience or hear about a traumatic event or condition. And I'm sure all of you understand, at least most of you. We might numb or we have an overactive fear response to the perceived threat. Our physiology is triggered to release stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and this signals a state of emergency to the brain that can leave us anxious. So our physical health is actually our mental health, because when we experience something in our mind, it is manifested in our bodies. So anxiety is grounded in the body as it is in our minds. So it affects our entire being. So in this case, my perceived threat was my mother's death based on this new diagnosis. So because her surgery was unsuccessful in Muscat, she was referred to Lakeshore Hospital in Kochi. So until I saw her physically, I began to wake up in the night and almost had like nightmares, and I started just weeping. And I wanted to see her right away. And I was afraid she would die before I could see her. So now my mother was not just a mother to me. She was my bestie. She was my big sister. She was my pillar of strength. She was my intercessor, my compassionate caregiver. She was, in fact, my everything after Jesus. So, and you wonder why she was all that to me, because I was an only child. So as you can imagine, this whole experience shaped my life, and she was my world. So in the midst of all this, a good thing that I did was I prayed. I talked to God very directly. I talked to God freely. I expressed my fears, my concerns with him and to him. And when I prayed, to be frank with you, I thought my prayer could heal her miraculously. I recited scriptures whenever I felt that mommy was going to die. I tried to avoid the pain by inserting Bible verses and speaking God's word out loud. It helped me a little bit to quiet and soothe my nervous system. So some people with the right intention told me to be strong and courageous. But let me tell you honestly, I couldn't be strong then because my logical brain was inactivated and my emotional brain was in alert mode. It was too activated. So all I could do was soothe my nervous system with a language it understood. And that was sensation. I listened to worship music daily, and I prayed with people who didn't judge me for what and how I felt. In our times of panic, or when our fight, flight, freeze mode becomes too active, we can soothe our nervous system by hearing music, humming, singing, taking deep breaths, and praying. So please do not judge yourself for being afraid or panicking when you hear bad news, because it's a normal response to tragic or sad news or events. But be compassionate with yourself, on yourself, and your nervous system, and tend it very carefully as you would tend to a baby in distress. So, and please never judge anyone when they feel afraid of what is to come, but be with them, spend time with them, sing if they are okay with singing, and pray with them. Provide them a safe space to be and feel the pain and fear. Empathize with them, because tomorrow we could be in their place, because life is unpredictable. So the doctors reported that Mommy would live for 6 months, as it was stage 4 carcinoma ovary. I wrestled with God. I couldn't think of losing her at that stage in my life. I had built a castle around my mother. She brought me up so well, and her compassionate and Christ-focused parenting was a key to her parenting success. And I wanted her to be with me as I raised my children. I felt so helpless and angry. I fasted and prayed as if I could twist God's arm to heal her, just in case He wanted her to die. I could manipulate God into healing her miraculously. That's what I believed. I don't think that was the right belief, but that's what I believed at the time. I've always heard people preaching and prophesying that healing is our right. And if God doesn't hear our prayers, it could be because of our sins. I felt judged and condemned by some people in the church and some professing Christians. My definition of God was that if you walk in God's ways, He will bless you with good health and wealth. And unfortunately, that is what some pastors preached and taught. I created a God in my mind, in my image, based on what I was taught about Him. I erected a God in the image of prosperity and health. If you don't have good health and wealth, it could be that you have sinned and He's disciplining you. And that's what I heard all the time. But in reality, my mother's health was deteriorating and our wealth was deflating. I fell into despair. But let me tell you, God heard my cries. Hundreds and thousands of people prayed for my mother. She was a prayer warrior, and many souls were willing to intercede for my mother. I believe that as we all prayed, our will aligned with His will, which was in His sovereign plan to extend her life. Miracle, we say. She shared her testimony of God's healing. She prayed more because she experienced God's healing touch in her body. It was a lived experience, and no one could deny her story. She was in the labor room in Boston when her first granddaughter was born. What a joyous moment that was. And I was thinking, wow, just like I prayed, just like I dreamed, what a faithful God. And I sang His praises. But after 2 years, her cancer returned. And from there, it was a downhill journey. Where is the God who healed her and extended her time from 6 months? Was it a mistake on our end to believe that He healed her? Maybe she went into remission, as medical science says, but we thought it was God who healed her miraculously. My questions were endless. I was frustrated. Like Philippians says, I was disappointed with God. I was disappointed with Him, not because He couldn't heal her, but because He did not heal her completely. I never questioned God's ability or His goodness or His sovereignty or His omnipotence, because I knew that He was God. And I was so disappointed that He didn't heal her, even though I knew He could do anything. When the diagnosis came first, God told me very powerfully and so closely through His word that His plans were not to harm me, but to give me a bright future. But after 2 years, I was scrambling to find the goodness in His plan for my family and me. If my mother is harmed, I am going to be harmed. My mental health is going to be deteriorated. My life will be harmed. How can I trust His promise that His plans for me were not to harm me? Questions turned to be anxieties and fears that were crippling. But I chose to believe that He would not take my mother away. if I worshiped him more, served him more, or stayed more and more holy. I thought he would heal her again because he told me his plans were not to harm me. I could never believe that this loving God would take my mother away from me. However, in front of my eyes, my mother's condition was deteriorating daily. Meanwhile, she saw her second granddaughter, and my mother's condition worsened. I was experiencing crippling fears and anticipatory grief. And anticipatory grief, also referred to as anticipatory loss or preparatory grief, it is the distress a person may feel in the days, months, or even years before the death of a loved one or other impending loss. It is the experience of knowing that a change is coming and starting to experience bereavement in the face of that. Patients with a terminal illness and their family members, friends, and caregivers often experience anticipatory grief. I would strongly encourage the church to be mindful of this psychological phenomenon in family members while caring for someone with cancer or other terminal illnesses. The family needs compassion, empathy, and care while caring for their loved ones. And I know Metrochurch of God is an example of how to care well. And we have seen that in our own family. Thank you again. The families may be dying deep within while caring and staying strong for their family member. I was also experiencing some postpartum psychological effects because I had two babies like 19 months apart, and my life was falling apart on one side. But on the other side, God was helping me nurture two little lives. On one hand, I was dying deep within me as I knew a part of my life was coming to an end. While on the other side, I was witnessing life coming out of me as I was playing with my children or nursing them. I was living in two different realms, death on one side and life on the other side. And you wonder, how can you have faith and fear together? Can faith and fear coexist? This is a $1 million question, isn't it? Like Pastor Max Lucado says, each sunrise seems to bring fresh reasons for fear. And in this age, we fear many things. I'm unsure if anyone here listening to me in this room has not felt fear in their lives. I mean, it would be a lie to proclaim that we have never experienced fear. Fear is a natural and default reaction to life's threats. It's not whether we experience fear or not, because fear is inescapable, but it is about how we respond to fear. Fear can serve a purpose in reconnecting us with a life-giving God. It may not only direct us away from a threat, but also direct us towards something we feel is worth living for. This is why God said so many times, fear not and don't be afraid in the Bible. Excuse me. I have met people who feel guilty for their fear and how the weight of fear not hangs over them. And when they continue having panic attacks or nameless anxieties. Looking closely at the fear not scriptures, it can help relieve that guilt instead of simply increasing it. When I studied the fear not or don't be afraid scriptures directly spoken by God, he says to people who are afraid, he never treated it like a sin, but he treated it more like an injury. You see the difference there. He comes when we are afraid. He comes and tells us, here, let me make it better for you. And then he says, fear not, I am with you. Don't be afraid, I am with you. So fear and hope are concurrent emotional streams we experience. And this understanding can open new possibilities of reactions. You know what happens when we suppress fear or use hope and faith to bypass or avoid fear? We give fear more power than it deserves, especially in shaping our reality. The more we suppress or ignore fear, the more control it will have over us. It is because we are not processing what is really causing that fear. And we are trying to whitewash it. We are trying to avoid it by using faith over that fear. We need to really see fear through its complex relationship with faith and hope, and allow that fear to lead us to believe in the nearness of God in our painful circumstances. Therefore, please acknowledge the presence of fear. Accept it for the why of experiencing it. We need fear to survive and cope, because it is fear that keeps us away from jail. And you understand that, right? If we are not afraid of the law, you're not going to obey it, and you're going to end up in trouble. And we stay away from danger because of the sensation or the instinct of fear. So we need fear to survive and cope. But we were never meant to live in fear. This is why the presence of God is promised to us, because God knows that fear will come and knock at our doors so many times. And that is why he never failed to repeatedly assure us of his presence, saying, fear not, don't be afraid, because I'm with you. While my mother was going through excruciatingly painful times, we were in Boston. God began to speak to me through visions and dreams about my mom. One example was I was sending my mom off at an airport. And at the airport, she disappeared for a while. And then when I looked, I saw her. She held her hands back as if holding something and didn't want to show it to me. Her face was glowing with happiness and she had a bright smile. And I asked her, Mom, can you show it to me, please? And she said, no. And she had a grin on her face. I asked her again and she showed it reluctantly. And I saw this pair of golden shoes sparkling in her hands. And then she disappeared. Because I was so adamantly believing that God would heal her and wouldn't change his word, I thought that dream was about her healing, and she would wear the sandals of the gospel message and go to places to spread his good news. Of course, I had a lot of faith in her healing. And another time, I saw her wearing a beautiful sari and driving an SUV, and she looked so beautiful. And I was standing at a corner in our town in Kerala, and I saw her driving, and I asked her, Mom, where are you going? And she had this confident, happy face, and she told me, I'm going to Appachan's house. And then she turned in the direction of her dad's house in Kerala. And then the dream ended. A theme in these dreams that I contemplated for days is that she looked so happy and she was being detached from me. And that was unbearable. She didn't care to take me with her because she knew I needed to complete my mission here. But she was happy to go be with her Jesus. But in my flesh, and I call it in my selfish flesh, I pleaded with the Lord not to take her. She was young. She was only 52 years old when she passed. I shared my dreams with one of our closest family members, friends, Rega Chichi and her Amachi, who are in Boston then, and Rega Chichi, they live in Texas now. Rega Chichi's Amachi is also with the Lord now. And after hearing my dreams, Amachi knew it was about Jesus calling mommy home. And one day, Rega Chichi told me so hesitantly that, Mola, through those dreams, I think God is preparing you for mommy's homegoing. And she comforted me with those words. But you know what? Deep within me, I didn't want to accept it. After a few months, we moved to Michigan. We were in a new place, new people, new church. Our girls were little. One of our prayer partners and mentors saw a vision that Jesus was leading mommy to heaven. He shared it with me, and I was not happy with him. I didn't believe him. And I said he needed to pray more. I didn't want to think that Jesus didn't keep his word. Because I was questioning, Jesus healed her one day, but why Jesus would take her now? By the time I reached home with my family, my mother had taken her last breath and entered the presence of Jesus. When God says no, how to face the death of our loved ones. Let me tell you this. The moment I entered the bedroom where my mom's body was lying, she had just taken her last breath. Her body was still warm. My blood froze in my veins. I felt the ground beneath me give away. I felt so helpless at that moment that I never experienced the force of God's presence and sovereignty that I experienced in that moment. I never experienced such a force of God's presence and his sovereignty that I experienced that moment. I felt God's presence just filling that room. Everyone singing and praying around her while she was taking her last breath. They left the room to give me space to cry. I felt God just rejected my prayers. I felt that he just closed his ear to me. Like, I'm not going to hear you anymore. And at the same time, I saw God being enthroned in that place. I realized I couldn't control him with my fasting and prayer because he's sovereign over all creation. I felt so little before him. My pride was crushed. My life was just wasting away. That's what I thought. But I looked at my mother's face and I longed for that beauty and peace I saw on her face on me. It was that peaceful. Though I couldn't identify her as my mother because she was skin and bones, the beauty of Jesus was just shining on her. She was like this fallen soldier who fought a good fight in the end. The last words she told me before I started my journey from here were, "Mona, don't worry about mommy. Mommy is okay." Those were her final words to me. And indeed, she was okay. But before we started our flight from here, the Lord spoke to me in a powerful way through a verse that I never remember reading in the Bible, though I have read the Bible more than 100 times already. It is from Isaiah chapter 51, verse 11. So the redeemed of the Lord will return and enter Zion with singing, crowned with everlasting joy. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee. I, even I, am he who comforts you. Why should you be afraid of mortal man, of a son of man who withers like grass? What a powerful verse that was. That verse carried me through the funeral and burial service. But you know what? The dark nights of my soul had only begun. Let me tell you this. I was a pampered only child. I thought I had everything growing up. But the moment I learned that I had nothing, was when my mother was no more breathing. Being an only child is not easy when one of your parents dies, because there's no one to share your grief with. You eat your pain and drink your tears. People in general were so kind to me. Some family members never cared to call. Maybe they thought that I was strong. But those who did contact me, I thought they looked up to me for strength because my mother was a generous woman. She served the poor in her community. She gave and gave and gave until her last breath. My dad was her primary caregiver. So everyone wanted me to be strong for them. And I pretended I was strong for everyone. I comforted everyone, but I felt there was no one to comfort me. Some people expressed relief that she was no more in pain. That is true, but they never saw how much I was hurting deeply, even when they said that. So if you comfort someone, please do not tell them that their loved one is in a better place or that they are no more in pain, because the one who is grieving knows that already. Those words will only hurt them because nothing can fill that void in their lives right now. Being an only child, I always squeezed my emotions tightly into a ball. I used to only talk with my mom. My husband was available for me, but I wanted to be so kind to him because he was walking with me so patiently through my anticipatory grief journey. And I didn't want to take him through another painful journey. The Lord brought a couple of people into my life at the time. They have become my mentors and counselors. They called every day and checked in on me. They never advised me about what I should be doing and how I should be grieving, but they listened. Even still, I couldn't feel comforted fully. I was worried about my dad. He was lonely. I thought I was carrying this heavy burden on my chest and couldn't breathe freely. The closets and showers had become my places of crying out loud because I had little kids at home and I didn't want them to know that I was sad. Grief has not only affected me psychologically, but it also affected me neurobiologically and physically. After about 5 months of mommy's passing, I did not wake up one morning. 911 was called. I was rushed to the hospital. There I woke up surrounded by my husband and my pastor. All the tests they ran on my brain came back negative. Everything was normal, except that everything was not. A consultation with a friend who is a mental health provider helped us realize that it could be that I entered a catatonic state. A traumatic event or losing a loved one can cause mental trauma. As an outcome, the individual encounters extreme emotional stress, which causes them to enter a catatonic state. Amid this grief, I joined a PhD program in counseling. I used to cry and write assignments and do projects, cry and make dinner, shed tears while washing clothes, folding my little girl's clothes. It was just unbearable. But the breakthrough came when Jesus met me in the kitchen while I was cooking dinner one day. One day he stopped me while cutting some veggies for my children. It was so audible that I cannot ever deny it. He said this: "What do you do when someone graduates?" That was an unexpected question because as I went through this I was going through this rigorous PhD program and I couldn't wait to graduate. So this is the meaning of saying he meets us where we are at. And I said to God, you give a diploma and they feel free because that's what I wanted to be. And he goes, all right, do you take that person through more tests and exams after graduation? And I said, no, why should they go through that? That would be unfair. And all of a sudden I became a social advocate. And he responded, yeah, that is unfair. And I said, yes. And then he said, your mom completed the work she was assigned. She graduated with excellence. Am I not a fair God? I gave her the diploma and she graduated, and I will not allow her to go through her test again. Then his voice stopped. You know, I never thought of the death of a Christian that way before. As soon as I accepted this response, a peace that I cannot describe washed over me, just from my head to toe. The kitchen that I was standing became my sanctuary. I began to worship God. I had an encounter with the living God to whom my mother belonged. I felt that he was for her, that she was his. I could hear him saying, she is my daughter. I gave her to you as your mother, but she belongs to me. She is with me. Now you do the work I ask you to do and complete it. That was a commission, and that happened in my kitchen. The Lord delivered me from intense emotional pain, and he has been helping me to go through grief less intensely. The grief became a part of me, but I was no longer crushed under the weight of it. The emptiness is there. The void is there. I have a vacant spot in life where someone I loved used to be there. If you ask me what grief is, I would say this. It is the what ifs, the should have beens, the never agains. It is complicated, brutal, and harsh. I felt intense guilt for not being able to be present when she took her last breath. That guilt was so heavy that I cannot even describe in words. It was due to circumstances out of my control, but I was so angry that Jesus took her away before I reached home. But my spiritual mentor gave me perspective and helped me think in a healthy and authentic way. And actually, that was the truth. And that truth set me free. That helped heal my hurting soul. I slowly came to a place of singing authentically, that not seeing her taking her last breath was well with my soul. I have spoken with people going through intense grief who ask me, am I crazy for feeling this way? Is this normal? And if you are someone who thinks that, is this normal to feel this way? Please hear me. Imagine grief like this. And this is a neurobiological perspective shared by a neuroscientist in her book, The Grieving Brain. She said, imagine that someone has stolen your dining room table. You woke up thirsty in the middle of the night. You leave the bed and walk to the kitchen to get some water. And down the hall, you need to go through the dining room to the kitchen. Now that your brain remembers, you're hitting the dining table as you're finding your way through the dark. And you feel, and then you wonder, what is it I feel? Because that is what your brain knows. Because whenever you walk through that way in the dark, you hit that dining table, knowingly or unknowingly. And this time, you realize that there is nothing. Suddenly, you're aware that you don't feel anything in that spot at the height of your hip. And you're aware of not feeling something. That's something specific. The absence of something has drawn your attention, which is weird, right? Because always, at least most of the time, the presence of something draws our attention. But in this case, it is the presence of the absence of something that draws our attention. As human beings, our world is a virtual reality map made up entirely in our heads based on our previous experiences. Your brain is moving your human body through the virtual map it has created from its prior knowledge, which is why you can easily move through your house in the dark. You know where the kitchen is. You know where the dining room is. You're not using the external world like the electricity to navigate that. You're using your brain map to get around this familiar place with your human body arriving where your brain has navigated it. No one expects their dining room table to be stolen. No one expects their loved one to die. We were created for life. God has put that desire for life in us. But it's the fall, when Adam and Eve sinned, that brought death. We don't want to die. We don't want anyone else to die. When we become aware of the presence of the absence of our loved one, the brain begins to try to solve the problem of helping us walk through two different worlds. Grief is a heart-wrenchingly painful phenomenon for the brain to solve. And we must go through grieving to solve it well. Our brain has to relearn to help us live in the absence of someone we love deeply, who is ingrained in our understanding of the world. For the brain, your loved one is gone, at the same time, also everlasting. And you need to walk these two worlds, understanding, or you need to walk these two worlds of understanding simultaneously. It is both confusing and upsetting. Dear sisters, God has created us so wonderfully and magnificently. We have information messengers in our brains called neurons. They use electrical impulses and chemical signals to transmit information between different areas of the brain and between the brain and the rest of the nervous system. So when we are with our loved ones, the neurons become active, and the neuroscientists call it fires. The neurons fire. Neuroscientists found that if someone close to us dies, our neurons still fire every time we expect that loved one to be present in the room. And this neural trait persists until we learn that our loved one will not be in our physical world again. The virtual reality or map we created based on our previous experiences needs to be updated with the current and real map. Is it any wonder that it takes many weeks and months of grieving and creating new experiences to learn our way around again? Our brain predicts. If I ask you where your husband or children are, even if they are not home, you may be able to tell, yeah, it is night, almost 9 p.m. They must be in this place. A fundamental problem in grief is, when I say problem, because it's not a problem, it is actually a phenomenon, but it is something that our brain tries to solve. A fundamental issue in our grief is a mismatch between the map we are familiar with and the map we are currently trying to navigate. See, after they die, they're not on the map at all. Can you imagine the alarm and confusion they would bring into our world? This is why grief overwhelms us. This is why my body and mind reacted in a way that didn't make sense to me anyone. But my brain was trying to live in that confusion and chaos, not because I had less faith, but because I was human with a living brain. We all have attachment needs. Just like a baby needs a mother, we adults need our loved ones, such as our spouses. The need for the comfort and safety of our loved ones requires us to know where they are. We long for them when we realize that they're not in this physical dimension. We ache to hold them. We ache to hear their voice and feel their touch. And that is okay. And that is a normal response to the pain of losing your loved one. Now, as Christians, we know they are with Jesus. That means They are not in this physical dimension where we move. We hope to see them when we leave this world. That doesn't take away the ache, though. I've heard people telling me, and I've witnessed Christians throwing this verse around so rudely with judgment and condemnation, that 1 Thessalonians 4:13 and 14, brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we think that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. Apostle Paul doesn't ask that we not grieve, but we do not grieve like those who have no hope. What does that mean? And what is the difference? I'll share that and we'll wrap up here. If you have a broken arm, you consult your doctor. They do the necessary test and tell you that this can be fixed, right? They instill hope in you. You trust in medical science. You trust in that doctor's expertise. You're hopeful that this will be fixed. But that hope doesn't take away the pain you have in your broken arm, right? Because in physical reality, your arm is broken. You can't deny that. If the doctor says, hey, I told you that it would be fixed, can you not have any pain? Can you be strong, please? Can you be courageous? Can you stop crying? What would you say? Doctor, I have pain. I have a broken arm. I mean, you said that you'll fix it tomorrow. Thank you, but I can't bear this pain now. When we tell people don't cry, be courageous, be strong, they are in a better place, and so on, when they're grieving. And when we say that, hey, you're sinning when you're crying, hey, it says you have no hope or faith. Actually, we are shutting down the reality of grief. The brain is trying to solve a problem, and we are not allowing it to do it naturally. Instead of saying that, minister to those who are grieving. Please do not judge yourself for them. Grieving involves crying. Lots and lots and lots of crying, praying, singing songs, worshiping God, experiencing the fear of losing more loved ones. That is something that I experienced for a long time. I thought, oh, who is next? My husband, my children, me? I experienced a lot of fear. That was part of the grief that I experienced. And we need to allow that broken heart to heal while holding on to the hope that we have in Jesus, that he will wipe away every tear from our eyes. I love that verse. He will wipe away every tear from our eyes. He will use his own hands and wipe tears away. And that day is coming. We will see our loved ones. We will embrace them because we have hope through Jesus. Grieve as those who have hope. Grieve while hoping for that one day. Death is inevitable. That means resurrection is undeniable because we have Jesus who is alive. Would you please comfort yourself and others through these words? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Selin Phillip, for that very appropriate message for us and our church in this time, for your time.